Good morning, everybody. So, we don't have our Destination Kids up and running for another couple of weeks yet. So, you know what that means? I can talk as long as I want to. No, that's not what that means. Listen, we're starting a little series, and just before the end of just before our break, a good guy I happen to know stood up and reminded us of something that God said, something that Jesus said about rest. And I believe that he spoke it here today for us all to remember that Jesus actually comes to give us more than a good night's sleep, but in fact there's something bigger at stake called peace. And if you're somebody that struggles with peace, real peace, maybe you don't even know what real joy feels like, or used to, you forgot, I don't know, but maybe this message is for you. We're starting something this morning called, well, actually not starting, we're continuing. I'm starting because I actually see humans now. We're continuing something called Good Questions. And I'll start this morning by just relaying this little story of something that happened to me to get us going. I was having a very boring day, doing boring things. You ever had one of those? And I just wasn't doing anything special, and I was having a conversation with someone, and we're just talking about everyday things we were planning to do. I was going to be here this time, do that, the other thing, and the subject of somebody that needed some help doing something came up, and I said, yeah, I'm going to go over there. I'm going to do that tomorrow, and probably take an hour or two, something like that. And it really wasn't that big a deal, but just something that came up, and he looked at me and said, I don't see how you think any of that is worth it. I said, any of what? like helping somebody on, I don't know, what are you talking about? He goes, any of it. I don't see how any of it is worth it. And I'm kind of like thinking, what? Is this a theological discussion, or is this philosophy? What are we talking about here? And he said, it's just, I have a respect for Christianity and all that stuff. I think it's good, but you do all these things for all these people all the time, and it costs you money and it costs you time, and you're missing out on a lot of stuff that you could be doing, and life is short, and you know what? It's not like people are going to remember you when you die. Maybe there's a heaven or something, maybe, but life is hard, and life is hard. You might as well just get all you can out of it while you're here, because once it's over, there's nothing that's going to go back and change that. Whoa. That's a tough one. That's rough, isn't it? It's a really depressing thought. And here's what I think. I think actually, truthfully, many, many, many people feel that weight in their hearts. I think they feel that. I think they think that. Even people of faith are tempted to think along those lines. They start to think, is this really worth it? This idea of committing your life and just shaping your life around moment by moment what you think Jesus would want you to do in this moment, is that really worth it? Look at the cost. Look at what it's going to cost you to do that. Maybe you don't really see a lot of cost, or you don't think about it as cost, but maybe you've heard stories of people that have paid more cost than what you might pay here in America, and you have thought to yourself from time to time, I don't know if I could ever do that, what they did. They walked into this line of fire, wherever that was, they were quizzed on whether or not they believed in Jesus, or they, were going to be faithful to the communist state, and they said, no, I can't say that there's no God. There is a God. My God forbids me from saying there is no God. I can't say that. It's not true. Knowing full well what would happen. We sometimes look at that from the outside and we say, I don't know. I want to think that could be me. I don't know if I could do that. It's hard. And honestly, it's not like life for everybody is just a bed of roses either. Right? Even if you don't come to some, dramatic end. There's a lion cage somewhere with your name on it. Even if that's not how it goes, life is hard. Life is hard. It's hard to make ends meet. It's hard to make relationships work. It's hard to get to a place where you want to be in life. It's hard to get any peace. It's hard. Everything is just hard. Everything is so hard, and sometimes it's just downright brutal to people. If you know what it is to be betrayed or abandoned or neglected early on in life or later in life after a long time with someone, you can just come up with an endless number of reasons that life is actually quite hard. And to be fair, sometimes it looks from the outside and sometimes it feels on the inside that becoming a Christian actually just going to add more of the hard to it. It's just going to make it harder. It's just going to make everything way more. It's hard to make a living. Now you've got to make a living, and you're supposed to be what? You're supposed to be keeping an eye out for other people's needs and thinking about them. And, I got all my own problems. I can't think about other people's stuff. And I'm supposed to be thoughtful. I'm supposed to be thinking about what benefits everyone. And I'm supposed to be generous. And on top of everything that's hard, it just seems like it must be harder. And sometimes, if you're honest as a Christian, if things get hard, you would be tempted to wonder, is this going to be worth it? Is it? People wrestle. And I want to give you an answer. I want to give you an answer to that. I think it deserves an answer. Is following Christ really worth it? Thank you. Some proud parents over there, right? My answer actually is, it depends. You're like, what? Depends on what? It actually depends on what you think heaven is. You ever think about heaven? You think about it?
Yes, sir.
That guy thinks about it a lot. He's proud of it. It's like, I need to think about heaven. I got some stuff going on. I think about heaven a lot. It depends. It really depends on what you think heaven really is. If heaven is an idea that's just kind of like something that's meant to comfort the people who are left behind on earth, to make them feel a little bit less bad, like, well, they're not totally gone. They're not gone forever. Just kind of hold on to that in your heart. I could see why people would question whether this is worth it. Honestly, that's not that impressive. If it's just an idea, a comforting idea that we like to think maybe it's true, I could see why. If heaven is real to you, but it's kind of like this thought of like a boring place. A lot of people, younger people, are concerned that heaven will be boring. I would maybe like to go to heaven. I'm not sure how many of my friends will be there, but I'm afraid all they're going to do is play harp music, and they're going to pull all of the lyrics out of the songs that I like, and it's just going to be really bad. I'm just going to be like, okay, what's up in 10 minutes? If that was what you think about heaven, I could understand why it wouldn't be that big a deal. Oh, well, there'll be a lot of clouds, and the downy bear will be there all the time, bouncing around on precious, warm loads of fluffy laundry. No, I don't think that's what heaven is, actually. Some people look at heaven and say, I hope that that's real. I love the idea. I hope that it's real, but they just struggle with believing it. And of course, some people are, look, just being honest. Some people don't think it's a real thing at all. Some people think, look, you're alive for a while, then you die, that's it. It's over. Period. And this guy named Leo Tolstoy, I don't know if we got any readers in here. This guy was a fiction writer. He was actually probably the best novel writer of his time. He's actually thought of as like the best novel writer in like history in some circles. Okay, I know there's debate about that. I've actually never read his stuff, but I have read about him because he's a really interesting guy. He's a Russian, and he was at the time of when the whole Russian thing was going from a monarchy over to maybe communism and flip-flopping around, and there was hard stuff going on, real miserable stuff at times. And he wrote about this very problem. It was a struggle for him. And as you listen to this, I just want you to imagine that this is not like a person who cannot think. This is not like just a really ill person who just can't put a thought together, or just can't think straight. This is what Leo said. He said, "My question, that which at the age of 50 brought me to the verge of suicide, was the simplest of questions lying in the soul of every man, a question without an answer to which one cannot live. It was, what will come of what I am doing today or tomorrow? What will come of my whole life? Why should I live? Why wish for anything or do anything?" It can also be expressed like this: is there any meaning in my life that the inevitable death awaiting me does not destroy? He's summing up the wrestling match that I think every human being should go through. We should look at the end and question, well, what is the point? What is at the end? Because what's at the end determines what the point is now. And when this man, looked at his life and looked and said, well, I guess you just die and then it's over. He asked a very rational, logical question. What is the point of being alive at all if it ends? If everything I ever do is just going to be erased, who cares? If everybody I ever do anything for and even remembers me after I've gone will then die, and everything they ever knew or thought or felt is going to be erased, what could possibly be the point? And he gets suicidal. Or at least he thinks about it. He thinks about it. You know, and if you thought that, if you thought it was just the end, and maybe you do, maybe you listening out there do today, and I hope that you keep listening even though, because I may have something for you that you've not heard yet that might be a help to you, something that would be very difficult to argue with. I hope that you stay in with me. If you just thought that, if that was the end, let's say that it was, I guess what you try to do is you try to live to get as much pleasurable experience as you can for this short time, because you're going to be alive for this short time, so you might as well make it as little of awful as you can possibly make it. But of course the problem is you're trying to have a pleasurable time during this short experience. How much satisfaction can there be if you know that it's actually just going to end, and every day that you have another good experience is just another day closer to the whole thing being over, and you might as well, you've never been. How do you get your mind around that? That is the question. So what I want to do this morning is just share something with you, and this will be good for you if you're the most faithful person around. It'll be very eye-opening for you if you've looked at Christians from the outside in and wonder what is wrong with those wacky people. I want you to listen to the way that John, the Gospel John writer, that guy, the one who was with Jesus until Jesus was crucified and came back and then went on, and he actually lived to be an old man. That John, who wrote the Gospel of John, actually wrote this booklet we call Revelation. And it was a vision that John said that he was given from God about from here to the end. They call it the end times, all that stuff. And I could not possibly explain everything in Revelation to you, even if I had the time, because honestly, there's so much symbolism. But there is a few little pockets of places. This one toward the end in Revelation 21:1, where he just speaks pretty plainly about what God told him. And at the end, God tells John about heaven. And this is what he says about what he saw and what he was told. He said, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. And there was no longer any sea, no more ocean. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death, or grieving losses, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.'" You know, a lot of people grow up with this concept of heaven as like this kind of like mystical, far-off place you go away to. Right? You're going to go away to heaven. Who knows where heaven is? It's somewhere. And God is speaking to this man about heaven, and he says, "Look, you live in the old order. Okay, there's an order of things. There's a way that life goes. There's a way you've experienced life up to this point. You know what that's all about. I'm going to swap that out. I'm going to swap in something new that you have not experienced before. The old earth, the way things looked. I'm getting rid of that. I'm going to swap things in, and the difference is going to be, the new order of things is going to be how I run the show, not how you guys have run the show. Which should be good news. Which should be good news. Because even the happiest person that you know admits, this life is hard. It's really hard sometimes. Just so hard. And it's not hard just because it's hard. It's hard because of the way that things are done here, the way that things are. Look at death. Look at death. You love somebody, you have somebody close to you, and all the time in that relationship, lingering over your head all the time, they might just disappear someday with no warning. That's hard. And then so you love this person and you make the relationship work, and then somewhat, they die. They go, and then they're gone. You can't talk to them anymore. And all that you can do is wish that something that happened wasn't real. And wish that something that happened could just unhappen somehow. And you could put it back the way that it's supposed to be. That's what people wish in their deep, dark place, okay? Not dark necessarily, but that deep down place in a person's soul that longs for things. They long that we could just put this life back the way that it's supposed to be. Where people aren't looking at each other and valuing each other at zero. Where people don't kill each other at the drop of a hat for a pair of shoes. Where people look at each other and they see something of worth, something of value. We imagine a place where people don't lie to us. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the people around you valuing you so highly that they would never keep something from you intentionally to try and get you to do something or get more out of you or get away with something? Can you imagine what that would be like? You can try. The truth is, you've never experienced that, not in your whole existence. People have always lied to you. Little lies. My mom just told me little lies. Just little itty-bitty ones. They're harmless. Yeah. Yeah. Lies grow. You and I, we long for something. We long for a something where death isn't always a threat. We long for a something where people treat us right. We long for people. Imagine this. In all of the romantic relationships you've ever seen or been a part of, can you imagine a day where people do not experience everything that there is to experience at the deepest level about another person, and then say, yeah, it's really not for me. I think I'm going to go try something else. Can you imagine that? That's normal to us. We expect that. We expect it. Unbelievable. God describes for John what heaven's about. There's a way you guys do things here. And when the second act hits, we're not doing that anymore. If you want to commit yourself to me, follow me, come with me, we're not going to do that anymore. It gets better after. Better after. It doesn't just look pretty good. It's not just okay. It's not just really good. It's actually perfect. Everything about life that was wrong is going to be made right. I'm going to put it right. I'm going to put a solution to the problems that people have, and it's going to be a permanent solution. It doesn't end. There's life, and then there's life, and then there's life. And there's life. Can you imagine that? I know that it's hard because it's nothing we've experienced. But it's what God is trying to tell to you through John. You should see the end as a Christian very differently than you see the end as someone who does not believe. It's very, very different. If you believe that the end gets better, it is so much better that when you're there, you won't be sort of like moaning and groaning about all the things that were injustices in life and all the people that didn't treat you well or fairly, or people that just, or how sickness came into your life and it just wasn't fair, all the injustice of it. When you get there, that's not what he's talking about. It will not be, he says. And I'm going to read just a little bit further than I had slides for, because I want you to hear this. Forgive me for a second. Okay, a second. He who was seated on the throne, just right after he says this, said, I am making everything new. Then he said, write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true. He said to me, it is done. I am the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. To the thirsty I will give water without cost from the spring of the water of life. Those who are victorious will inherit all this, and I will be their God, and they will be my children. He goes on from there to say, who won't be there? And just before the terror of this hits you, just hold on, just listen to it, but hold on. He says, but the cowardly, the unbelieving, the vile, the murderers, the sexually immoral, those who practice magic arts, the idolaters, and all liars, they will be consigned to the fiery lake of burning sulfur. This is the second death. Well, that's intense. I'm not going to pretend that's not intense. But what I want you to think about for today, just this moment, is the idea of a world where there are not people lying to you. Where you do not have to constantly look over your shoulder to see if somebody's taking something from you. Somebody getting away with something that I should rightfully have. I should be nervous. I should be anxious. Always, eyes, eyes, eyes. The old invisible tennis match. Just, who? People won't be betraying you. People won't be mistreating you. You've got to see that side of it, I mean, it's sort of terrifying. It should cause fear in the heart of a person to realize how serious God is and what it means to follow Him versus not follow Him. But you need to understand what's there, why it's worth following Him. It's not a consolation prize to how sad life was. Now, some people, I've heard this many, many times, okay, many times. Good, well-meaning people, pretty good people, say things like, well, you can't get too worked up about all that stuff. You got to be careful you don't go overboard. Right? You don't want to be one of those people who's like talking about heaven all the time and talking about what we need to do before we're done here on earth. You don't want to be like that far. You know what I'm saying? If you could just be kind of like a balanced, nice, kind of a balanced religious person, because people, I guess, appreciate that. I don't know. I don't know that I'm any of those things, but people would say that, and I actually think that logic betrays itself. Because if that's you, if you're just kind of like, well, I'm participating in Christianity, I just don't, I don't get too hopeful about that part at the end. If you're doing that honestly, there's no reason to participate in Christianity. Because if it really isn't a real thing, then, what are you even doing it for? Why? It's not worth the cost. If it's not a thing, if you're not banking on it, it's not worth the cost. You're actually a rational person. If you believe that there is no God, you're actually very logical not to worry yourself about being a good person. What is good anyway if there's no God? It's just subjective. And who cares? Maybe you don't like it, but guess what? You're going to die too. Who cares? But when you believe, it's different. It changes everything. What you believe about your future changes everything about your life right now. I was listening to this guy named Tim Keller. He's a preacher in Manhattan, and he was talking about this subject. He was talking about heaven and having a hope. And he just relayed this little story about these two men. There were two men, bad grammar. And the two men were both sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in a dungeon dirt prison down in a hole someplace. And just before they went into that hole, one of them got word that his wife and his son had been killed. The other got word that his family was still alive. Both went down at the same time. The guy that believed his family was still alive somehow found a way to stay going. He could keep going. Somehow he found a way. The thought of those people that mattered so much to him being on the other side of this horrible thing, it was enough for him to do what he needed to do every day. Get up and hit the anvils and carry the things up the stairs and do whatever. The man that got word that his family was gone lived about 3 years. And basically, he just kind of withered up and died. Had no hope. Your hope dictates the way that you live. That's the key. That's the key. That's the key. Those old stories about the martyrs, the first people in the early church in Roman times, there were some really bad emperors, really bad ones, off and on. There was like terrible emperors, and then they get like a slightly less terrible one for a while, and then a more terrible one would come along and like murder him in his sleep, so they get replaced with a really, really bad one, and off and on these guys would come down the line, and at different times, they needed scapegoats for things. And they'd say, who can I blame for this thing? Who can I blame for this fire that I actually set myself so I could rebuild a new city that would look pretty to me from the top of the hill over here? Who? They would need scapegoats. And so the Christians made perfect scapegoats. Why? Because Christians refused to idol worship. They wouldn't do it. They would obey all the other regular laws for the most part, but when it came time to abide by the law of the empire and go up to the top of the hill and make sacrifices to Athena or Zeus or whoever, they wouldn't do it. And for the most part, people tried to look the other way. They said, well, we don't want trouble. We're not looking to kill everybody. But occasionally things would get bad and they need a scapegoat, and they say, this must be because the gods are angered because you guys refuse to worship, and we're allowing you to exist here. So they kill them. You know, they tried to make a point. They didn't always kill everyone. They didn't. Couldn't. They'd grab a hold of a family, take their house, take the family out, put them to the sword, say, look, all we need you to do is just admit that, Zeus is the god of the world, and, he requires a sacrifice, and they wouldn't do it. Wouldn't do it. And all kinds of other disgusting things they did to people. But they became famous. They became famous for the way that they walked into death. In the arenas, they would huddle together, and not because they were trying to avoid being bitten by the nasty lion, but because they could hear each other singing. They'd sing hymns they knew, and ones they made up. They didn't have the hymn book, They just sing things that were in their heart sometimes. And people were floored by these people. Seemingly weak people that walk out in there expecting to die. Some of them even tried to make it happen sooner because they were convinced. They had to be convinced, had to have been convinced that Jesus was actually coming back like he said he would. He was bringing it back. He was bringing life home. And his death and his resurrection was just the first installment, just a glimpse of the truth of what he was trying to say. Listen to what he said in John 14, preparing his followers for his death at the first communion table, the first and last communion they would experience before he was crucified. This is what he said. He said, don't let your hearts be troubled. 14:2, John 14:2. You believe in God, believe also in me. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I am going there to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come back and take you to be with me, that you also may be where I am. You know the way to the place where I am going. I don't know if every person listening this morning believes in Jesus, believes that he is who he said he was. But I can tell you that if you believe that, you have a lot of freedom. You have a lot of freedom. You have the freedom to, no matter how hard life is right now, to look and see the hardness of life, not as cruelty, but as a cost. Do you know what a cost is? You know what a cost is. You pay out costs all the time, right? Actually, not quite. You pay out expenses all the time. People come along and they nick you for this. I want $79.99 for internet. I want this for that. Oh, okay. And then it's just gone, right? You pay the money, then it's gone. You don't have anything to show for it. It's just gone. Sometimes you have a car, but you only have that for a while, and most of your cars are all in a junkyard somewhere or buried in a landfill. There is this one kind of a cost, though, called an investment. I'm a financial guy. Did you know that? It's kind of boring, right? There's this one kind of an investment vehicle. Brent, you're going to love me. I'm going to be so popular with you. It's called a Roth IRA. For a Roth IRA, please see Brent Sanford after service, or Jonathan Bartholomew, my brother over there. It's amazing. The Roth IRA is different. You put the money in a little bit out of your paycheck all the time, as much as you want, $250, $500. You can only put in $6,000 in a year. Some of you are like, I wish I had $6,000 in a year. I get that. But that's what you do. You put it away. And here's the thing. There is no immediate benefit whatsoever. You just put the money somewhere, and then you can't get it anymore. It's supposed to be growing. It's supposed to be growing, but you're not supposed to be watching it all the time. It's supposed to just be growing under somebody's watchful eyes, some skilled financial advisor, and you just keep socking the money away, socking the money away, and socking the money away. But it should be way more popular than it is. Why? Because when you become 59 and a half years old, or whatever it is, I can't quite remember, there is absolutely no tax ever again. Doesn't matter how much money you made in there. It could be big, $18 million. Doesn't matter. You can take all the money out you want, anytime you want, no tax ever again. Government can't touch it. Nobody can touch it. Nobody. I think you should make an investment in heaven like that. That's actually kind of like the way that Jesus described heaven. And following him, he said, look, don't store up treasures for yourselves here on earth where all these other things can get into them and ruin them and take them from you, where moth and rust can destroy. Store up treasures for yourself in heaven. Neither moth nor rust can destroy. There's something about heaven nobody can mess with. Nobody. I'd never say that there is no struggle. I would never say that. I would never say that you won't go through moments where you go, oh my gosh, this is just so, I don't know if I can do this, this costs too much, this is too much time. I would never say that you won't war with that stuff. But I will say that there is definitely an indescribable longing in the heart of every single person for life to actually go back somehow, by some miracle, be what it is supposed to be. Something you deep down in your heart, because of who made you, you know it's not supposed to be this way. It should be better. It should be righter. It should be good. And it's not. And there's that tension, and it never leaves. And honestly, it's never going to leave until you reach a place where it is the way that it's supposed to be. That should constantly call you back to the question, do I believe? Do I believe? Do I believe? It should call you back whether you've been a Christian, 13 years and a half. It should call you back whether you've never made any commitment of any kind in front of any other living human person. It should constantly be calling you back. It's the most rational, logical question there is. Do I believe? Do I believe that there is something more? Do I believe that God actually is going to come in and put this thing right? This is the last story, I swear. I was in the hospital. I was 18. Nothing against the hospital. Lovely place. I was too weak to stand up. I was sick enough for me to actually go to the hospital, which was pretty bad. And I got there, and they wheeled me in, and I couldn't walk. I just lost all my muscle mass and all that stuff. I couldn't stand up anymore. And the nurse comes in, and God bless the nurses too. She had to ask me this series of questions. She was required to. There's nothing, she couldn't, they I don't know, maybe they don't do this anymore. At that particular moment, they had this thing they were doing, and they're asking these people all these questions about depression. Do you find that, you respond positively or negatively to, adverse situations, on a scale of 1 to 10, all this stuff. And I had this thought. This is the thought. I said, I don't care. I don't have a brain problem, I have a gut problem. My brain works fine. Actually, in this moment, I was thinking these thoughts. You know what? I think this could be it. I think I might die. Could be tomorrow, could be next week. Might take a while. But I'm actually not even 18 years old at the time. I think I might die. And so I just had this thought, this little blurb pop in my head. I think I'll just answer the questions honestly. Don't do that. They ask me all these questions. Well, do you find that you have lately been losing interest in the last 3 to 6 months in things that normally bring you joy? Yes. Do you find that you have been withdrawing socially from others for in this time range? Yes, I have. Yes, I have. I just kept answering yes to all the bad ones. Because what question's coming at the end if you answer all the yeses. Would you like to see a doctor about possibly getting medication for this? I said, no. I said, this is what I thought. I could think just fine. I am wrestling with an extremely important question which I do not have an answer to. Why would I be okay? I want to know if I'm going to die or not. And I want to know if I do die, what's going to happen? And I don't know. How could a person ever get to be okay? We have this strange notion, and it's not like I totally disbelieve in medication for depression. I get that sometimes in instances where people really struggle a lot, it can kind of alleviate the tension of having to, make wild decisions and all that stuff that maybe you shouldn't make. I get that. But when we medicate people, it's amazing. They ask you all of these questions, and they never ask you the question, what do you think the point of your life is going to be? We'll give you a prescription without ever touching that answer. It's like if you're a person and you've lived and you're wondering, maybe this is all for nothing and at the end it's just over. Like if you don't have an answer for that, you should be perfectly okay to have that going on. Everyone has that. And you should be perfectly healthy, and you should be able to find joy in your life. And, it's just like, what are you telling me? You're telling me everybody learns to just pretend that that's not a thing? That's the realest thing I've ever heard of. My advice to you, if you are struggling with the idea of belief, it's not to just take James's word for it, because I'm some kind of amazing. Whatever. My advice to you is to keep pressing at being honest and asking questions and demanding of God an answer. Demand an answer of God. Show me, God. Help me answer this question. Are you there? What did you really do? What did you really say? And then get real mean about pursuing that answer. And don't just ask people, because you're going to, the first 5 people you talk to are going to be total dunces. Okay? They're not going to know anything. The first 5 pastors are going to probably disappoint you. But do not give up. Go into that thing we call the Bible. Go to the end. Go to the Gospel of John. Just go straight to the Gospel of John and just start somewhere. And I'm telling you, if you just be faithful to read through, you're going to find Jesus attempting to answer the questions that have plagued you your entire life. And if you're someone of faith and you wrestle, and you've been wrestling for a while, and you go back and forth, you kind of waffling a little bit. I don't know if I want to do anything anymore. I don't know if I want to be involved in Jesus stuff anymore. I think it might be time to come back and lock on to what is in store, says Jesus. That's what I believe. That's what I believe. So, in just a few moments, we're going to end with a song, actually, and communion, believe it or not. We haven't had communion here in a long time. And I think they gave you a little cup of almost nothing. It's like the tiniest the tiniest amount you've ever physically eaten in your whole life. Right? I hope you got one. If you didn't, you can just kind of pretend and then go home and do it for real. Pray by yourself and basically do the same prayer that we do here today. But I want you to remember, it's going to be very simple and short and sweet this morning. We're going to do it together as they end this song. I want you to remember and think about these words from Jesus no matter where you are in your faith. My Father's house has many rooms. If that were not so, would I have told you that I'm going there to prepare a place for you? Jesus said this as the last meal they would share together before his death was taking place, to prepare them, to stand strong, to stay steady in front of what they were about to see. The hardest hardness you could have faced. I'm going to prepare a place for you. If it were not so, I wouldn't have said so. He'd never lied to them before. As they finish, we'll share in the communion together, and then we'll be finished for today.